Hi everyone! Welcome to Module 2, an overview of the Green Climate Fund or GCF. In this module, we will provide an overview of GCF, the world's largest climate fund established within the framework of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change or UNFCCC, to support the efforts of developing countries to raise and realize ambitions towards low emissions, climate-resilient pathways. Let's get started. In this module, we will introduce GCF and discuss its governance structure. We will also provide an overview of various GCF funding windows and instruments. Subsequently, we will cover the details of accessing these funding mechanisms in Modules 3 and 4. The Green Climate Fund, or GCF, is the world's largest climate fund and a critical element of the historic Paris Agreement. It is mandated to support developing countries in raising and realizing their nationally determined contributions, or NDC's ambitions toward low emissions, climate-resilient pathways. GCF was founded in 2010 by the 194 countries parties to the UNFCCC during the climate talks in Cancun, Mexico. The GCF represents a key element of the long-term financing framework under the UNFCCC to assist developing countries in mitigation and adaptation activities. The GCF's secretariat is based in Songdo, Incheon, South Korea, and is governed by a board of 24 members. The GCF will support projects, programs, policies, and other activities in developing countries. It will be the centerpiece of efforts to raise climate finance by $100 billion annually by 2025. What does GCF support? GCF is not a development fund in the traditional sense. It is a global fund established to support the efforts of developing countries in responding to climate change. GCF focuses its support in two areas: mitigation, reducing or limiting greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation, adjusting to the impacts of climate change activities. GCF aims to balance its allocation between adaptation and mitigation equally over time and allocate significant resources to the private sector. GCF supports projects with co-financing and funding commitments from partner agencies. Later modules will provide more information on this. GCF is accountable to the United Nations. It is guided by the UNFCCC principles and provisions. GCF is the only standalone multilateral financing entity whose sole mandate is to serve the Convention and aims to deliver equal amounts of funding for mitigation and adaptation. GCF is the main operating entity under the UNFCCC's financial mechanism. It was mandated to make an ambitious contribution to global efforts to attain the international community's goals to combat climate change. The Conference of the Parties or the COP to the UNFCCC established GCF to make a significant shift towards low-emission and climate-resilient development pathways in developing countries and help keep a global temperature rise under 2 degrees Celsius. The COP to the UNFCCC annually provides guidance to GCF on its policies, program priorities, and eligibility criteria as an operating entity entrusted with operating the financial mechanism of the Convention. The board, therefore, takes appropriate action on guidance received from the COP on an ongoing basis and submits annual reports to the COP for its consideration and to receive further guidance. The GCF board is charged with the governance and oversight of the fund's management. It was established by 194 sovereign governments party to the UNFCCC. The board is independent and guided by the COP to the Convention. The board has 24 members, composed of an equal number of members from developing and developed countries. Representation from developing country parties will include representatives of relevant United Nations regional groupings and representatives from small island developing states and least developed countries. Each board member has an alternate member. The board members and their alternates are selected by their respective constituencies to serve for a 3-year term. 2 co-chairs of the board are elected by the board members to serve for 1 year, with one member from a developed country party and the other from a developing country party. GCF has a secretariat composed of several divisions and offices that report to the Office of the Executive Director. GCF has an administratively competent trustee to manage the fund's financial assets. The trustee will maintain appropriate financial records and prepare financial statements and other reports required by the board. Committees assist the board in its decision-making and exercise any delegated authority under its overall authority and direction. The board establishes technical and expert panels to assist it in performing its functions, and these panels generally only have advisory functions. These panels may include board members, alternate members, and external experts. The GCF has a structured framework to facilitate its mission of supporting projects, programs, policies, and other activities in developing country parties using thematic funding windows for mitigation and adaptation. The GCF structure is built to ensure effective governance, oversight, and implementation of its objectives. Here's an overview of the key components of the GCF structure. GCF has a fully independent secretariat responsible for executing the fund's day-to-day operations. It services and is accountable to the board. Within the GCF architecture, we have accredited entities that will access funding from the GCF through programs and projects funded by various financial instruments such as grants, loans, guarantees, equity, and results-based payments. Each country's national designated authority or focal points interfaces with the process to ensure country priorities ownership and support. Next, let's look at the details of the various stakeholders involved in the GCF funding process. Starting from National Designated Authorities or NDA. NDAs are government institutions that serve as the interface between each country and the fund. They provide broad strategic oversight of the GCF's activities in the country and communicate the country's priorities for financing low-emission and climate-resilient development. The Department of Finance is currently the Philippines' NDA to the GCF, acting as the primary point of contact between the GCF and the Philippine government. The Department of Finance facilitates communication, submission of funding proposals, and dissemination of information related to GCF processes and opportunities. NDAs, like the DOF, have crucial roles in helping ensure the effectiveness and efficiency of GCF-funded projects. In coordination with other relevant government agencies, the NDA ensures that GCF-funded projects align with the country's strategic priorities for climate change mitigation and adaptation. It plays a crucial role in ensuring the country's ownership of climate finance. The NDA is also responsible for issuing a no-objection letter for project proposals submitted to the GCF. This letter is a critical step in the GCF's approval process, indicating that the proposed project aligns with the country's climate goals and priorities. NDAs work to enhance the capacity of local stakeholders, including government entities, private sector participants, and civil society, to engage effectively with the GCF. This may involve organizing workshops, training sessions, and informational campaigns. The NDA facilitates coordination among various stakeholders within the country to ensure that GCF projects are integrated and supportive of existing climate change initiatives. This includes engagement with civil society, the private sector, and local communities. NDAs provide strategic guidance to entities seeking GCF funding on developing and refining their project proposals to ensure they meet the GCF's criteria and the country's priorities. The accredited entity or AE is another important stakeholder in accessing GCF funding. AEs partner with GCF to implement projects. Guided by GCF's investment framework and the priorities of developing country governments, accredited entities convert concepts into action. They work alongside countries to develop project ideas and submit funding proposals for the GCF board to approve. AEs can be private or public, non-governmental, subnational, national, regional, or international, as long as they meet the standards of the fund. AEs carry out a range of activities, including developing funding proposals and managing and monitoring projects and programs. Countries may access GCF resources through multiple entities simultaneously. A direct access entity, or DE, within the context of the GCF is a national, regional, or local institution accredited by the GCF to directly access funding and manage GCF projects within their country or region. The direct access approach is designed to strengthen countries' and regions' ownership of climate change projects and initiatives, enhancing their capacity to address climate change issues. National development banks, ministries or governmental agencies, regional environmental funds, and local non-governmental organizations might be examples of DAEs. Promoting DAEs is a key aspect of the GCF's commitment to empowering developing countries to respond to climate change, promoting sustainable development, and transitioning to low-emission, climate-resilient pathways. GCF recently updated its long-term strategy to deliver more mitigation and adaptation impact for developing countries while strengthening country ownership and capacity to identify, design, and implement projects and programs. GCF aims to generate significant mitigation and adaptation outcomes, helping developing nations turn their climate action plans into impactful investments and projects in line with the Paris Agreement. It seeks a balance in financing climate change mitigation and adaptation, ensuring resources for adaptation address the immediate, critical needs of the most vulnerable countries, including the least developed countries, small island states, and African nations. When accessing GCF funding, there are 4 project sizes that AEs or DAEs can apply. These are micro projects with budgets of up to $10 million US, small projects with budgets up to $50 million US, medium projects with budgets up to $250 million US, and large projects with budgets of more than $250 million US. The current GCF portfolio as of 2024 stands at $51.9 billion US for approved projects. With $13.5 billion US in committed funding, $10.8 billion US under implementation, and $4.1 billion US disbursed. In terms of project funding by access modality, international organizations are accessing 77% of the funding. Regional organizations access 10% of the funding through the direct access approach. And 13% of the funding is accessed by DAEs through the direct access approach. GCF recognizes the crucial role of the private sector in addressing climate change and achieving the transition to low-emission, climate-resilient development pathways. As such, GCF has developed specific mechanisms and approaches to engage and mobilize private sector investment in climate action. GCF's private sector financing aims to leverage additional capital, innovation, and expertise from businesses, financial institutions, and investors to complement public sector funding. The Private Sector Facility is a dedicated division within the GCF that is designed to facilitate private sector involvement in climate finance. It aims to mobilize private capital by investing in projects and programs that can deliver significant climate impact. The Private Sector Facility focuses on areas where private investment in climate action is currently insufficient, seeking to demonstrate the viability of such investments and encourage further private sector engagement. Funding for the private sector accounts for 36% of the overall GCF portfolio, or an equivalent of 55 projects to be funded. Examples of private sector engagement include financing renewable energy projects, such as solar and wind farms, in regions with limited access to clean energy. Supporting climate-resilient agriculture practices and technologies that can improve food security and farmers' incomes. Investing in green buildings and sustainable city projects that reduce emissions and enhance urban resilience. Here are the steps for applying for funding for the private sector through the Private Sector Facility. There are 9 steps, starting with developing a project idea that supports the country's climate action plans and priorities, engaging AE, having GCF approve the project, and signing the funded activity agreement between the Private Sector Facility and AE. In addition to the GCF project funding, GCF also provided the Readiness Program to help developing countries build capacity and increase their ability to access GCF funding effectively. The program aims to enhance countries' readiness to plan for, access, manage, deploy, and monitor climate financing. By doing so, the GCF seeks to empower developing countries, particularly the least developed countries, small island developing states, and African states, to take ambitious action on climate change. The Readiness Program provides resources for a range of preparatory activities, including but not limited to strengthening institutional capacities, developing strategic frameworks, preparation of country programs, enhancing direct access, project development and pipeline building, stakeholder engagement and coordination, technical assistance and capacity building. The GCF Readiness Program, under the GCF Readiness Strategy 2024 to 2027, allocates up to $1 million per country per year for readiness support activities, with additional funding available for specific purposes, such as support for national adaptation plans. The goal is to ensure countries can access GCF funds and implement and manage funded projects effectively, leading to sustainable and impactful climate solutions. To provide more support to AEs in developing proposals, GCF's Project Preparation Facility, or PPF, is set up to support accredited entities in preparing high-quality, bankable project proposals that align with GCF investment criteria and the goals of the UNFCCC. The PPF aims to enhance the capacity of AEs to develop projects, particularly in the early stages, where funding gaps can often hinder progress from concept to implementation. The PPF can provide up to $1.5 million per project or program request by an AE to GCF. On average, the requested value of PPF support is approximately $600,000. All AEs are encouraged to articulate counterpart financial support for project preparation within their application for support from the PPF. A no objection from the National Designated Authority (NDA) or focal point is required for all PPF requests. There are two types of PPF support. One type of support is for micro to small-size projects to cover activities such as feasibility studies, environmental and social assessments, gender assessments, etc. The second type of support is for medium to large-size projects on detailed project design, stakeholder consultations, capacity building, and risk assessments. The PPF funding modality allows AEs to receive funding from GCF to undertake project preparation activities independently. As such, AEs organize the procurement and implementation process directly and are accountable for overseeing and reporting the approved funding and activities. The PPF service enables the GCF to use a roster of independent consultancy firms that can provide project preparation services to AEs. This PPF access modality enables the Secretariat to deploy such firms directly upon request, ensuring fast and quality delivery to AEs who face challenges in procuring and project management of PPF activities by themselves. And this concludes Module 2, an overview of the GCF. Please feel free to repeat the material, and when you are ready, please proceed to take the quiz to complete the module.